Welcome to the Teacher Experience podcast. We are your hosts, Miss Wild and Miss Bierman. Now, before we begin this episode, we would like to remind you of the competition we are running in collaboration with Tidy Think UK. They are an award-winning business and they have amazing teacher planners and teacher notebooks. The competition winner will receive an educator notebook in a design of their choice, and of course, it will be personalised. Please head over to our Instagram in order to enter. The competition is on our grid and it is blue and it has loads of educator notebooks in the picture. This is an example. This is the one that I got and I'm absolutely in love with it and have started using it already. Welcome to today's episode. We are thrilled to have a truly inspiring guest with us, Ellise. Ellise is not only a motivational and public speaker, but she also serves as the disabilities coordinator for the Jill Dando News Centre, part of the Priory Learning Trust. Beyond that, she is a passionate ambassador for equality, diversity and inclusion, as well as augmentative and alternative communication. Today, Ellise will share her personal journey navigating mainstream education while living with cerebral palsy. Her story is one of resilience and determination. Though she faced a challenging and rocky road during her primary school years, she has turned those experiences into a powerful message of awareness and hope. Her secondary school years marked a positive shift, illustrating how the right support and understanding can make a significant difference. Join us as Ellise opens up about her unique experiences and advocates for a more inclusive and supportive educational environment for all. Her insights promise to inspire and enlighten, offering a valuable perspective on how we can all contribute to making education a better experience for everyone. Welcome, Ellise.
Hello.
Ellise, thank you so much for being here today. So our first question that our listeners would love to hear is, can you please share a bit about your personal journey with cerebral palsy and how it has shaped your educational experiences?
I have always had a positive can-do attitude and I'm a strong-minded person. I will always find a way to do things. I have had lots of challenges thrown at me over the past years. In daily life, cerebral palsy may take longer, but I will always get it done. It's okay to take a step back and recharge. I have help from my amazing mum, who is my inspiration. She helps me with feeding, getting ready for the day, and getting me to places where I need to be. I have never ever known what it's like to talk, run, walk or feed myself without struggling or being in pain. And I'm never sad because I'm here and alive and life is worth living. It's beautiful.
It's really nice to hear that you've got such a positive attitude. It's absolutely amazing. And I think people can really take advice from you to have that positive can-do attitude. And obviously you are so lucky to have your mum, and it's beautiful when you've got someone that's not only your inspiration but your day-to-day support. And I'm sure everyone that listens that has cerebral palsy can relate to you and all of the struggles that you've been through, being in pain every day. So thank you so much for sharing that. So we'll move on to our second question now. So what were some of the most significant challenges you faced in the classroom and how did you overcome them?
In my primary school experience, I had some amazing teachers who understood my needs and were so lovely to me. However, I will suggest some ideas to consider if you have a student with a physical impairment. Sports day. I felt left out, forgotten and not involved, and sometimes embarrassed, and I'll explain why. In reception, the crawling race and the running race were great as parents and teachers cheered me on and made me feel happy. But in year 5, the children got faster They finished and I would have only just started, and I felt embarrassed when the clapping seemed to last forever. As lovely as intentions were from parents cheering, I wanted the ground to swallow me up. At secondary school, we had an option whether we wanted to join in on sports day. If this is not possible to do in primary school, you could take an advantage of doing physio or make up some games to do, like throwing bean bags or kicking a ball. Ask the student. Forced friendships. I was forced to make friends with people who I wasn't close to. I just wanted to play with my friends, not friends that the professionals chose for me. My friends were on the rota system. 2 different friends were allocated to me each day. Like any other child, I had stronger friendships and a best friend, who I would have liked to play with more. But if my best friend came up to me as she wanted me to play with her, she was turned away by my support, as it wasn't her day, and equally there were girls and boys who didn't want to play with me that were forced to. Although everyone had my best interests at heart, this rota system for friends for me didn't work. At lunchtimes and in the classroom, I was just sat with my assistant. It would have been nice to not feel different and have a friend or friends around. It's important to remember that what works and is appreciated at a young age does not always work as you get older.
Ellise, thank you for sharing those stories. I'm really happy that you picked Sports Day because it is something that most pupils within the UK at the moment, Sports Day is coming up, and Sports Day is such a big event within the school calendar. So thank you for sharing a story about Sports Day. I'm sorry to hear about the experience you had in year 5, that you did feel embarrassed, but I'm so pleased that you have the confidence to share this story, because like Miss Wild said earlier, there will be people within the UK that might be neurodiverse, that feel they have embarrassment around things like this. People that are physically able and physically not able as well may feel that they get embarrassed sometimes. So thank you so much for sharing this story. And it's okay that if other people listening to this do feel that it's embarrassment. So thank you so much for sharing. It was really great that you had the option to do something different. I think that's really kind of your teachers to give you that option. And the options were, again, you could go to physio, you could do alternative activities. It's great that your teachers gave you that option and that you could choose. And I love that it wasn't just one alternative. You had sports day that you could go to, or you could do this, or you could do this, that you had your own choice and your own thought process behind what you wanted to do the day, which is really, really great to hear. In terms of your friendship, this is a really interesting one. So I am the special educational needs coordinator at my school, and friendships is something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I deal with pupils who are neurodivergent, who have physical impairments as well. Typically the one that I deal with the most is hearing impairments and visual impairments, and friendships is a conversation I have all the time. So it's great for teachers to hear your insight into this, in that actually friendship should be something that you have complete autonomy over. Friendship should be something that you should have control of. At the end of the day, we don't know who we're going to get along with. No one can predict that. So it's great that it's hard to hear that you went through that experience. But again, thank you for speaking to us about this, because we can educate our teaching staff that whilst you, like you said, they had your best interests at heart, actually they should have given you complete autonomy over that situation. So thank you for sharing that with us as a teaching community, because that's great insight for us. So the next question we think our listeners would love to hear is, what types of support systems So this could be teachers, teacher aides, technology. Have you found the most beneficial within the education system?
When I was just 3 years old, I had a speech and language therapist. She assessed me, and then I was given a communication book. This was a personalized book of photos and symbols. It had lots of pages with a menu and the vocabulary categorized so that it was easier to access. My support would look at where my eyes were looking at, or if the page was big enough, I was able to use my fist to touch the picture. When I started school, staff had to be trained in how to use my book with me. It was also at this point that I started to use switches like Flickr to support my access to writing. Using switches was an extremely time-consuming and slow process. My mind worked so much faster than I was able to record. I remember the frustration, but I kept my cool and managed to show everyone what I was capable of. I was then able to move on to using a joystick to access the computer. This made things a little quicker, although my accuracy was not great, and mistakes were made, so what I gained in speed in one way, I lost in another, through having to make corrections. For my communication at this point, I was loaned a communication device called a Mobi. It had been personalized and programmed just for me. Both my communication book, the Mobi, had to be updated regularly with new vocabulary so that I could access my lessons and also so that I could socialize with my friends. I could only write what was programmed in. When I was finally given the opportunity to try my guess with a laptop at the age of 11, initially it was tricky to make sure that I only clicked on things that I wanted to click on. But I discovered I was a quick learner, and I soon mastered this. By this time, I was able to read and write at a similar level to the rest of the students in my mainstream class. I used an on-screen keyboard, using my eyes to type. I managed to complete work which was set by the teacher, and often I would produce more work than some of the students who were writing. My problem was I didn't like the voice. It was very computerized and I felt embarrassed using it. I felt different. Therefore, my support assistant would stand to the side or behind me so that they could read what I was saying. This went on for most of my time in secondary until I met Ellise. She suggested that I should be assessed at Bristol Communication Aid Service for a new communication aid. She also looked at different voices. This I guessed was so much faster, and I chose the Queen's voice. And from then on, the shy girl had a voice. Together we found the Queen's voice, which I liked very much. It was when I began to use Queen Elizabeth II's voice that I decided to allow my computer to talk for me instead of relying on someone else to read everything that I typed. For the first time in my life, I felt comfortable and proud to be able to talk. Following the referral and assessment for a communication aid, I was allocated with this device I am using today.
Thank you, Ellise. That is such a great story for us teachers to hear, because we often look into aids that we can use in the classroom. But what you've shared with us, Sarah, is that actually the voice that's used on the computer system is actually really important to you. And people that haven't had your experiences, actually that might not come to the forefront of their mind, that actually the voice that's used on the system is really important to you. Love that you use the Queen's voice. That is amazing. Big supporter of that. That's so great. But I'm really glad you highlighted that. It's not something that I would have initially thought of. So it's great that we can highlight this importance to teachers so we know that actually this thing is really important. I love that you mentioned at one point that you use the system obviously to communicate with your friends. The social side of it is really good. We want the support systems that we put in place to support you in the classroom and get you the education that you deserve as equally as everyone else. But we also want to be able to support you socially and build those friendships as well, because friendships are so important to everyone. You used a few words there. Previously, you used the word embarrassed, and then you used the word you felt different when you're using the computerized voice system. I think it's really important to highlight at this point, as all teachers, not just people that work within the SEND department, not just the SENCO, all of us need to try and help anyone, whether they're whatever their challenge is, to make sure that they don't feel different. That's the number one, whether it's neurodiversity and it's things you can't see physically on someone. We don't want anyone to feel different, and it's just minimizing that change. Ms. Scott, did you have anything you could add to that?
Thank you so much, Lisa. It was genuinely really eye-opening to hear everything you had to say. I think two things really stood out for me. You said about having things that made learning accessible for you. So you said about at the beginning you were given a book that was big enough in order for you to point at the pictures, and you said it was accessible because it was big enough. It was photos and symbols, and it was much easier for you to be able to communicate and be able to learn. We talk all the time about cognitive overload and making learning accessible, and that shouldn't be any different for students with disabilities or SEN needs. So really thank you for sharing that and highlighting that. And the other thing that just really stood out, use the sentence, the shy girl had a voice. That is so powerful and genuinely wells me up a little bit. It's so important that every single student has a voice and every single student is heard. And every single practitioner should be ensuring that their class has a voice and every single student in that classroom has a voice. So for our listeners again, because I want it to really ring in their ears, the shy girl had a voice. Please remember that, our listeners. So we are going to move on to question 4 now. So the question is, how can parents of children with cerebral palsy best support their education and collaborate with teachers and...
My mum is super proud of everything I have achieved. When I was younger, she used to have to fight for help and what I needed, as she felt it's all about balancing everything out, including happiness, learning, friendships, physio, speech and occupational therapists, and all whilst feeling included in a mainstream setting, not to feel different. It's quite a juggling act to achieve, but it can be done. Every child with cerebral palsy is different. It's a big umbrella term, and there is no textbook way to do things. Every child is different. I know my mum was guided by me and did what she felt was the right balance. I was very lucky with my secondary school. Every effort was made. I felt included, like I was wanted, and I was keen to go to school. Nothing was too much trouble. The main thing was they listened to me as a person. We all had meetings and spoke together. I had a voice, and we had the perfect balance. They always had a positive can-do attitude. For once in my life, I loved school.
It's so wonderful to hear that you loved school. That is just so wonderful. It sounds like you had the most amazing support network at school and also at home, which was so wonderful to hear. The umbrella term is such a big highlight for me because at schools I sometimes fear that we put people into boxes, and it's a conversation that we have quite a lot in mainstream school. That yes, someone has a diagnosis of ADHD, for example, but that individual personal experience of that diagnosis is very different to the person next to them with the same experience. So it's a really great thing to highlight. Cerebral palsy is an umbrella term. And like you said, just listen. Just listen to the person. Let them explain to you what their experiences are, what their challenges are, what makes them laugh, their friendships, their family. Just listen to them as a person. It doesn't need to be the title. You don't need to put them in a box. It's just listening to them. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, question number 5. How can teachers and schools facilitate positive interactions and relationships between students with and without cerebral palsy?
In my secondary school, things were adapted so I could do everything like my classmates. In the classroom, I was sat on a table with friends, and my assistant set me up and was there ready to help. But also I felt that she distanced herself so I had the opportunities to interact with friends. It was the perfect balance. At lunchtimes and assemblies, I was able to be with friends. I felt so included and valued as a person. I had a big friendship group who used to always help me with everything. They treated me like anyone else. I was the comedian in the group, and often I made them laugh. I was so loved by everyone, and I didn't feel different from them at all. Schools can give them independence and encourage them a lot.
As you can see, it's put a huge smile on my face. It's so lovely to hear that you had the opportunity. And I think, again, 2 words come out of that for me. It's independence and relationships. You had the opportunity to be independent at every opportunity. So in the classroom, the fact that your TA set everything up for you, gave you all of the support you needed, but then stepped back so that you could interact with your friends and be a teenager and talk to your friends like you would in any other situation and like every other student has the possibility to do because they haven't got a TA sitting next to them. And that's when you build those relationships in classrooms. Quite often, I'm sure we all know that your friendships normally end up being the person you sit next to in your lesson because you see them all the time. So that's fantastic. And for our listeners who obviously are mainly educators, having those adapted resources so you are doing exactly the same learning as your peers is so important because also if we think realistically you're sitting the same content of exams at the end of it, so you need to be having access to the same resources and doing the same tasks. That having that inclusion, that independence set up by the school perfectly is fantastic. And then the difference between your primary school and your secondary school, you were able to spend time with your friends at lunch and have that friendship group. And like you say, being the comedian, absolutely love that. Beautiful. So next question then is, what resources or training do you recommend for teachers to better understand and support students with cerebral palsy?
I believe schools need to have CPD and training sessions on inclusion and SEND, especially having a guest speaker who has lived experiences and attended mainstream education with SEND to speak about their own experiences in a mainstream setting the good and the bad, and use them as examples to support the students with disabilities in the best way possible. Schools can learn a lot and be more open-minded with that information.
Thank you, Ellise. I totally agree with you. Just training on inclusion would be amazing. I would love for the UK government to spend more money and have a bigger budget on raising awareness of all that fall under special education needs and disabilities. I would love it for it also to be mandatory to be part of the training process. It's such a small part of what required people to pass their teaching qualification. And I would love it to be bigger. And I would love the government to put more money into continuing, like you said, CPD sessions, continuing training sessions on everything that umbrellas special educational needs. So I totally agree with you. And I also agree that guest speakers is the best way forward. I am a special educational needs coordinator at my school. I have dyslexia, and I say to people all the time, that's my only lived experience. It's actually really hard for me to impart knowledge with people when it's not my lived experience, any other diagnosis. So I do think I totally agree with you that guest speakers is definitely the way to impart that knowledge. So thank you. We do have one final question for you. So if we look forward, what change or improvements would you like to see in the education system to better support people with cerebral palsy?
I think the biggest thing for me would be to ensure that more students like me have the opportunity to be educated in mainstream schools. More and more students with cerebral palsy are now educated in special schools on a sensory curriculum. With this type of education, it is far more difficult for students to learn to read and write. In mainstream school, during those early years, you are immersed in literacy throughout the day. Whereas in special schools, they have so many children with extreme needs and learning difficulties. There isn't enough time in the day to spend as much time on literacy, which is the most important thing for a nonverbal person to learn. Without my literacy skills, I would not be able to write what I want to say. This podcast would not be possible for me. Literacy is everything. Being able to read and write is something I am grateful for every day of my life. Another important thing to mention is that mainstream schools are extremely short of money. Funding to schools is being cut in real terms, and schools struggle to employ the staff they need. This affects the way that schools view people with additional needs. It is possible that if I was 15-20 years younger, I may not have got a place in mainstream. It is quite common now to hear that mainstream schools feel unable to meet the needs of young people with conditions such as cerebral palsy. They do not have enough money to assign one teaching assistant to one person. And this is the level of support that I required throughout my schooling.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think you've hit some really, really key points on the head there that absolutely, essentially, we would like to, mainstream schools would like to be able to have students with cerebral palsy in their schools, but absolutely they're underfunded and they haven't got the capacity to do that. And all that does is put you at a further disability, which is unacceptable. So the education system is flawed in that sense, because you are absolutely right. We see so many students with cerebral palsy going into SEN schools, and actually, like you say, the literacy, which is vital for you to get on in life, is what is lacking. And it's one of the things that's on the teaching standards. It is every teacher's responsibility to ensure that every single student has their literacy enhanced, and that's everybody's responsibility. And we do need more funding so that we can provide that mainstream education for people with disabilities such as cerebral palsy. So absolutely, we do need to see that change. So thank you so much for today. Jess, would you like to add anything?
Thank you. I just want to say that your positivity, your humour, your can-do attitude has absolutely shone through, and you're such an inspiration, and we can only thank you for joining us on the Teacher Experience today. We just hope that our listeners, who are mainly teachers obviously, can just take a few snippets away from this conversation, and thank you again. You're such an inspiration.
Thank you very much for having me.